Used cars. My favorite thing to talk about, because really when you're talking about the life of a car, the used car market and the used car process is something most people know nothing or very, very little about. Sure, they know about a car being manufactured. Someone's got to make the car. It's got to show up on a dealer's lot. I need to go buy it. It's new. Nobody's ever used it before. There's very little kind of weird things that happen in a new car purchase. Used cars are the wild west of cars. So first we're going to talk about how a used car even gets to the dealer's lot. And then we're going to go through the process of what happens when a used car becomes used and used and used and used and used, and then what? So let's start with how it gets to the lot. Most people think that when they drive by a car dealership, whether it's a new car dealership that has a whole used section or a mom and pop, what we call an independent dealer, which is a dealership that sells all kinds of different brands and doesn't have a franchise tag to it. Most people think that those cars are all trade-ins. Wrong. In fact, in over 80% of the cars you see on that lot are not trade-in vehicles. Well, that's interesting. Where do you think they come from if they're not trade-ins? The answer? Auctions. Here's what happens. Consumers have cars. They bought them new. Now, or they leased, let's say it's a lease. Same scenario, I'm talking about leases and purchases. Consumer leases or purchases a car, drives it for 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years, puts 100,000 miles on the car. Now they want to get a new car or a new used car, a different car. They take that car and they go and trade it in. And most people think, well, Stephen, how did you just tell me that over 80% of the cars on dealer lots are from auction if you just told me that the customer goes and trades in their car? Here's what happens. Customer trades in the car. The car gets on the dealer's lot sometimes, and the dealer will put it on the lot for 30 to 60 days. Sometimes. After that period, when it doesn't sell, or if it doesn't sell, then the dealer sends it off to auction. And there are hundreds of auctions around the country and international. I mean, obviously more if you broaden that scope to international auctions. They specialize in different things. You have standard used car auctions for members only, like a Manheim, for example. That's the big player. You have public auctions sprinkled throughout the country. And then you have totaled car auctions, right? And we'll talk about what happens when a car is totaled in later videos. That's really interesting stuff. But you have auctions that specialize in selling just those cars. Standard auctions, the way they work is that the dealer will send the car to auction after it doesn't sell on the dealer's lot. However, some dealers won't even put it on the lot. They will take in the customer's trade and they will immediately go sell it off at auction. The buyers are all over the country. They can be big dealers, they can be small dealers, they can be rural dealers, they can be urban dealers, they can be suburban dealers. They can be in big cities, they can be in little cities. All over the place, all have access to these auctions. And that's where they buy the cars. Now, some dealers will go to the auction, put their eyes on the car, touch it, turn it on, see what's going on, make sure it's all working properly, and others do this all online. Auctions have different ways of presenting vehicles to dealers. Okay, they mark them with different lights. There's green light, yellow light, red light. They have different disclosures to disclose certain issues. They have different processes by which they go through to evaluate the condition of the car, and they'll make detailed condition reports, and then they'll offer guarantees where if the dealer gets the car from auction, it gets transported to the dealer and it's not what they thought it was, then the dealer has the right to send it back. That's called the arbitration process. It's an auction arbitration. Happens all the time, okay? But dealers, when they take a car in trade, I want to reiterate, they will sometimes put it on the lot and sometimes they won't. How do they make that decision? Well, usually it's based on market, right? Some dealers are just not going to sell an $8,000 15-year-old car with 150,000 miles on it, right? And other dealers aren't going to sell a 2-year-old car with 10,000 miles on it that's worth $50,000. It's not their market, okay? So they will send those cars off to auction. The other thing they might do is consign it. In a consignment arrangement, The dealer is finding another dealer or another seller who might have better access to that market, comes to the dealer and makes an arrangement where they say, I'll sell that car for you, and when I do, I will pay you X% or X dollars, depending on the way the arrangement works. Those are all heavily paperworked. We do them all the time in my office, but that's generally how the car gets from the point where the consumer trades it into the dealer to the point where it gets to another dealer. Okay? If it's by auction, then the buying dealer buys it. They then have to arrange for transportation. Remember, we talked in a previous video about new cars being transported. Used cars get transported as well. They get picked up from the auction, and they have to get to the buyer's lot so the buyer can then fix it up, clean it up, get it ready for sale, and sell it. Tons of things go wrong in that process, right? If we think that issues arise in new car transport, it is compounded in used car transport. We've seen cars go missing. We've seen cars come damaged. We've seen cars, I had a case recently where a car was dropped off with beer cans and stains of beer all in the car. It was a Porsche. It was a beautiful car. Stains all in it. Transmission was all messed up, and there was a beer can sitting in the cup holder. There was no beer can in the cup holder when it was picked up by the tow driver, right? So the transport driver. So those things can happen, and they tend to happen a lot in used car transport, okay? So the car gets bought at auction by a buyer. It gets transported to the buyer's dealership, and then it's getting to get ready to be sold as a used car. So now let's talk about what happens at the used car dealership or the new car dealership that has a used car lot, right? Either way, we're talking about what happens to this car now that it is a used car and it is for sale. Well, those dealers have a particular set of issues that they come up with that are different than franchise dealers, right? One of them is in advertising. How do you advertise that car? Cars.com, Auto Trader, Car Gurus. Do you use one of the online sources, right? What do you do, and how do you advertise your vehicle? How do you fix it up? What kind of warranties do you provide? What kind of warranties do you sell? Is it still subject to manufacturer's warranty, which is transferable until it expires, right? All of those things go into consideration when you're talking about what does a used car dealer do? What representations do they make about the car, right? And in each one of these steps, there is a recipe for failure. Not only that, I want to take a step back. We talked about physically how the car gets to that used car dealer's lot. What we didn't talk about is the economics of doing that. Most used car dealers, the vast majority, do not have cash or enough cash to just go buy the car straight up at auction. Okay? They're not usually buying one car at auction. They're buying 20 or 30 or 40 to put on the lot. I mean, how many dealers have you driven by that there's only one car on the lot, right? Zero. That doesn't happen. Not a very profitable dealership if they have one car on their lot. So what do? They have to buy 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, multiples of vehicles to populate their lot. Well, not a lot of people have $300,000 to $500,000 to $1 million in the bank ready to go to the auction and buy that many vehicles. So what do? They arrange for something called floor plan financing. And here's how floor plan financing works. The dealer goes to the finance company and says, we would like essentially a line of credit. We want a certain amount of money that allows us to go buy cars at the auction. The way this works differently than your standard line of credit is because it is secured by the vehicles. Remember, we talked about financing back when we talked about new car customer financing arrangements, and we talked about a security interest and how the company that they use to finance the vehicle gains a security interest in that car so that that company can then go repossess that car in the event the customer doesn't pay. Similar here, the way a floor plan works is that the floor plan company gets a security interest, but not just in that car, they get it in all the dealer's assets. 99%, I think I've seen one or two arrangements where this isn't the case. The vast majority of times, the floor plan finance company gets an interest in all of the dealer's assets in the event that the dealer defaults on their floor plan arrangement. Here's the other thing that makes floor plans so different. Floor plans are different because they have fees we call curtailments in the industry that arise when a car is not sold in a certain amount of time. And every arrangement is different, but the way they generally work is that the dealer will buy a car at the auction, will transport it to, using their floor plan financing, will transport the car to their lot, sit it on the lot for sale. They're paying interest on the financing, just like any of us pay interest on any loan we take. But let's say 30 days go by and that car is still sitting there and hasn't been sold. Well, the floor plan company can add a curtailment to the balance owed, which is actually another fee that the dealer owes for failing to sell that car and pay off that floor in that certain amount of time. Keep that in mind. If you're a consumer shopping, you know the longer the car stays there, especially if it's on a floor plan, the more it's costing the dealer, the more incentive they have to sell. But our perspective in our law firm, we come at it from the dealer side because that's who we represent. And we look at it like this: you better get that car sold, because the last thing a dealer needs is for a floor plan company to start calling their floor. When that happens, it is an absolute mess, and it is very, very hard to negotiate a resolution when the dealer has a floor plan company in default, when they're in default of their floor plan obligations. So it's super important that the dealer sell that car. Worse yet is when dealers take out a second floor, and instead of using the floor to buy cars, which they're supposed to do under the contract, they use that floor to pay off the other floor. Now you have compounding interest, and it's really hard to get out from under it. Lesson learned: don't do that if you're a dealer. It is much easier to deal with default on one floor plan than it is to deal with default on two floor plans. So the dealer uses the floor, buys the cars at auction. What happens to the titles? Most customers don't know this, most consumers. The title stays generally with the floor. And until the floor is paid off, the floor does not release the title. That's their security. That's their collateral. That's what they're holding to make sure the dealer eventually pays them off. The floor holds the title and only releases it when the dealer pays that money to the floor. Then they'll FedEx or UPS or however they'll do it. They will transfer the title. Then the dealer can transfer it into the customer's name. At least that's how the process normally works here in Georgia. I know other states, the customer transfers title, but here in Georgia, the dealer does it. So that's what happens. That's how the financing works. The floor holds the title, and the floor gives the title to the dealer once they're paid off. Different than a normal loan arrangement because of the security, because of the terminology, because of the curtailments, etc., etc. And that is how most used car dealers can afford to put their inventory on the lot. So now the customer has bought the used car, is driving it. They're now the second owner, the third owner, the fourth owner, etc., however down the line they are. I saw one recently where it was the 23rd time that the car had been sold, and I'm talking to my client, the car dealer, and I'm like, you didn't think there was something wrong with that car when you were the 23rd person on the Carfax report? You know, I'm looking at the dealer like, hey, maybe this isn't the kind of car you should have bought at auction, because it was probably bound to have issues if it's had that many owners. But regardless, let's say now the car is practically out of service, right? People have decided, a consumer has decided, and we've all had this with our vehicles at some point or another. We've driven it till the wheels fall off. Well, now you're at the point where the wheels fall off. And you can take it to a CarMax, you can get it to Carvana, you can take it to a local dealer for an estimate, and you're getting $200 or $300 for this jalopy. It's just not worth it anymore. It's rusted, parts aren't working, etc., etc. What happens when you take that deal? And when the customer takes that deal and knows there's no way this car is going to end up being used again? Well, two things can happen. Number one, the customer can be right, or number two, the customer can be wrong. If they're wrong, most likely it means that the car is being shipped overseas. It's getting sold once again at auction to an overseas buyer. It's getting shipped to a country where the regulations are not nearly as strict as they are here in the United States, and the buyer over in that country is able to then take the car and prep it for sale, whatever that means in that country, whatever they need to do to just get the thing working, right? We don't have that luxury here in the United States because we have emissions testing and we have different consumer laws and different things that the dealer, or if you go all the way back to the manufacturer, has to do in order to get a car and actually sell the car. If you go to some foreign countries, they don't have those rules. If it drives, it works. And that's all they try to do is make sure it drives. But let's say it doesn't sell overseas. What happens to the car? Well, it gets scrapped. And there are two ways, really, that it can be scrapped. Number one, the parts can be melted and recycled and remanufactured into new things, right? There are parts in these vehicles that are valuable. I should say raw materials, not parts. Raw materials that are valuable. The other thing that can happen to it is it can be chopped. It can be taken apart, and there are companies that do this. They're all over the country, not just on eBay, but they're actually physical locations where they take the cars apart and they sell the parts, right? You have a 2010 Acura MDX and you need a rear view mirror. Well, you're not going to go buy a whole new car, and they're not making those anymore new. So you can go to one of these shops where they have a slew of these vehicles, and they will sell you a rear view mirror to a 2010 Acura MDX that's no longer running or was wrecked, and that's the reason it was there. One of the big players, locally at least, is a company called Pull Apart. Great name for a company. It tells you exactly what it is. They are open to the public. The public can go in and take a part. You need a radio from a 1995 Nissan 300ZX. Go take your radio. They happen to have one on their lot, and then they either sell it to you per item or for the weight of whatever that is. Those kinds of companies get their cars from auctions. Remember I said back when we were talking about auctions, there are multiple different kinds of auctions. One of them, a big player in the destroyed car, the salvaged car, the totaled car auction, is a company called Copart. What they do is when the customer has totaled the car, the insurance company pays the customer, and the insurance company takes possession of the car. They take that car and then they take it to an auction like Copart, where it gets sold as a totaled vehicle. And then a company like Pull Apart will buy from Copart and put it on their lot to sell as parts. They can make a lot of money selling parts because there are plenty of those cars working. Then the car gets taken apart, and now you've gone from a manufactured vehicle, design, all of that from the very beginning to the very end where the car is just in pieces being used by other people in their cars, and the cycle continues and continues. I hope you enjoyed this video series on the life cycle of a car. Stephen Lefkoff, Lefkoff Law, we're a Georgia law firm that represents car companies, runs the gamut. But if it's a company in the car business, we help.